morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nicola Corzine, and I'm the founding executive director of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. We are thrilled to have you all with us today. And for those of you who may not know, or it's your first time joining us, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potential and grow. And today's conversation is aimed to do just that. Now, before we get started, as a reminder, we're going to be opening up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions in the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen at any time throughout today's presentation. Now, as you may have seen in the chat, the Nasdaq Center is committed this year in a really big way to changing, through our partnership with Mentor Cloud, a new initiative around mentorship. It's called Mentor Makers, and it's got a big, bold vision of trying to deploy 1 million mentor hours for more than 50,000 businesses during this pandemic and beyond. And our commitment is to have these hours deployed over the course of the next 12 months. 92% of small business owners agree that mentors have a direct impact in their ability to be successful and supported. And yet 63% of our businesses don't have access to a mentor today. So we hope that you'll consider joining us in changing that paradigm. Think about whether or not you need and would benefit from being able to sign up and join us as both a mentor or a mentee in the movement. You'll see in the chat box how you can do just that. And of course, in addition to signing up and being a part of the movement actively, we also want to recognize all those mentors who have made a difference in each of our lives. So we have a big social campaign going right now. It's called Tag a Mentor. And what we would ask that you do is to recognize your mentors that have made a difference in your life with hashtag Mentor Makers. Recognize that in your post and tag at Nasdaq Center. And by acknowledging your mentors, we hope to encourage others to do just the same. None of what we do today, of course, would be possible without the generosity and the incredible support of all of our sponsors, donors, and foundations who believe in the criticality of democratizing entrepreneurship. To them, we extend our deepest thanks and appreciation. This includes Nasdaq, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, NZTE, and of course, Microsoft for Startups. We're really humbled and so greatly thankful for all of your contributions. Now, during these times, we're also taking a couple of quick polls before we get started with all of our programs, just to get a sense as to how our businesses are doing in this time. So right now, I'm going to launch a poll that asks you to just give us a very quick insight into how you're feeling. We've been tracking this since the very beginning of going virtual ourselves, coming close to 9 months. We want to get a sense as to how you're doing in these times. I'm going to be sharing these results in just a moment. Obviously, when that first started, there was an understandable amount of anxiety, and I think there still is, ranging into a tremendous number of our businesses and entrepreneurs who are simply still trying to survive. But we're seeing ever more over the last couple of months a tremendous amount of optimism, not to be surprised given that we work with entrepreneurs day in and day out. And I'm glad to say that right now, we're seeing that same sentiment today. So let me share those results. Definitely, optimism is very heavy in today's attendees that participated in this poll. So thank you for that. And just know that those make a difference and that you're not alone in how you're doing and how you're handling this very challenging year. I've got one more poll before we get started. So thanks for hanging with me. The next thing is just realizing we actually build programs based on what our entrepreneurs need. So what we'd love to understand from you is what's keeping you up at night right now. This will actually have an incredible part of our programming that you'll see going live in January. So as much as you can tell us, whether it's finance, sales, marketing, scaling, pivoting, team dynamics, know that we'll take this data along with all of the data that we're collecting across a myriad of programs that we offer each and every month to be able to determine what programs we'll be putting on over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So thank you for helping us get smarter around the challenges that you're facing right now. And just know that that has a direct impact into the programming that we'll put forward for each of you in the coming weeks and months. Interesting split today. We've definitely got finance leading just slightly right now, along with team dynamics, marketing, and scale. And the great thing with all of this is we'll probably be addressing many of those topics today. So hopefully you won't even have to wait the couple of months before you get some of these great tips from our amazing participants in today's session. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our amazing guest today. Your host for this session and this conversation is Jeff Thomas. Jeff is the chairman of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center, an amazing individual that I'm so fortunate to learn beside each and every day. He's also the senior vice president of Nasdaq Corporate Services. And joining Jeff in conversation is, of course, Shellye Archambeau, author of Unapologetically Ambitious: Take Risks, Break Barriers, and create success on your own terms. Shellye, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today, and over to you.
Thanks, Nicola. Shellye, welcome to this, what I'm sure will be a very insightful 30 to 45 minutes of content here as we learn more about your book and your story. And you really do have an extraordinary story. So I'm curious, why did you choose now as the right time to tell it and to come out with this book?
Well, it's interesting. I've tried throughout my entire career, Jeff, to be accessible. People reach out and I try to respond, and I would try to meet with them too. But as I got more and more responsibility, I couldn't meet with everyone that wanted to meet with me and pick my brain, hear my story, understand the strategy, etc. And I said, all right, when I get to phase 2, I'm going to write it down, because I want more people to be able to achieve their aspirations in life. And so I got to phase 2 and I wrote. Took a while, but we finally got it done and then out. But that's why, and that's why the timing.
Well, and obviously one of the journeys of writing a book is you have to figure out the title. And so you came up with Unapologetically Ambitious. Was that your first title? Was that your working title? Or how did you land on that as your title?
I'll be candid. It was harder coming up with the title than it was editing the book. I had the whole thing written, frankly, and I still had no real title that was grabbing me. But what happened is I knew I wanted ambition in the title somewhere, because too many times people would say, oh, you're ambitious. And it wasn't always meant as a compliment, which I thought was just totally ridiculous. But the unapologetic piece really came from 2 places. So one is my daughter had written a story that you read about in the book, but when she graduated from college, she was asked to come back and speak to her university in her entry kind of forum. She talked about coming into her own and being unapologetically who she is. And then I was talking to a group of friends about how much women apologize. And I said, women are raised from birth to apologize, I'm convinced, because 10% of the time we apologize is because we did something wrong, maybe. The other 95% is because we're trying to make the rest of the world feel better. Ease tensions, show relationships, show we care, right? All those things. And I said, we have to stop doing that. And that's when it all came together. And I just said, you know what? That's it. Unapologetically ambitious. Everyone deserves the right to be ambitious, and nobody should have to apologize for it.
Well, and as you're as a founder, right? So if you're out there constantly apologizing, you're probably not driving your vision forward as much. But then the other thing that happens a lot of times as you're going through a journey as a founder or an entrepreneur is you need a little bit of luck, and people talk about that. Tell me, how do you think about luck versus destiny, and can founders create their own luck?
So I'm a big believer that you can improve your odds to be lucky. Absolutely. Because to me, luck is just having the right skills, the right experience, the right attitude when opportunity comes along, so that you can actually take advantage of it. But many times opportunity goes right past us, not because it's not there, but because we just don't know about it, or people don't know to make us aware of it. So one of the best ways to improve your odds of being lucky is make sure you tell the universe what it is you want and what it is you need, because you never know who can help you. So I'm a big believer. If you don't tell the universe what you need, then the universe can't help you. And it's been my experience that if I share what I'm trying to do, if I share where I need help, I will actually get help and support back.
Well, and I think that's true in so many fronts. In marketing, they say somebody's got to hear something 7 times before it really sticks. And I think it's so true that you've got to have kind of that personal brand where people really understand what you're about, what you're trying to do, so that then there's those kind of aha moments of connection, which, some people may call luck, but again, it takes intention to really get people to think of you in that way and to think of sending you those great opportunities.
It does. And can I just add one piece to that, Jeff? Because here's something that founders can do. So a lot of times people say, oh, what do you do? Oh, I founded a company. What does your company do? So let me take MetricStream. Oh, what I could say is, oh, MetricStream, it provides governance, risk, and compliance software. Okay. Or I could say, oh, I'm CEO of MetricStream. We help companies solve the biggest challenges in risk management and compliance out there so they can avoid multi-billion-dollar fines and ensure that they're able to generate the right returns for their shareholders. Very different answer. And you probably have, but it's the same company, but you probably, in my second answer, have a better idea of what we actually do. So when you are introducing yourself, make sure you introduce yourself by telling the problem that your company is solving. People get problems. They'll remember problems. They don't remember governance, risk, compliance. I mean, if they're not in that space, that's not going to mean anything. So make sure you take opportunities to actually share what your company does by talking about it in terms of the problem it solves.
Well, and so much of being a great founder is being a storyteller and, kind of articulating things in a way people will remember them. What was a story that you shared in the book that you think people would be surprised by?
So we have to roll the clock back. Some of you may remember this and some not, but there used to be a company called Blockbuster. And Blockbuster was the behemoth of movie rentals before we could actually get them on television and digital downloads, etc. Well, I was the first president of Blockbuster.com. I was missioned and tasked with building out that website, getting the basic foundation in place for when ultimately technology would allow us to leverage what would become today's digital downloads, etc. Well, we had the opportunity, Blockbuster did, to actually do a deal with Netflix. Reed Hastings and I got to know each other as a result of being in that same industry. He and team members came out and pitched, let's take Blockbuster.com, the brand, right? Netflix, the technology, put these things together and conquer the world. And my boss, the CEO, passed. So that might be something. Opportunity. Remember I said opportunity happens all the time, but you have to be able to take advantage of it.
Well, there's something about the old Wayne Gretzky saying about skate to where the puck's going, not where it is.
Absolutely.
Well, and so, one of the things, we have a lot of folks on these webinars. We had John Chambers on. He talks about his superpower as being able to see around corners or catching the next wave. What would you say is your superpower, and what's your advice for founders in terms of helping them to find their superpower?
So I actually have two. Mine are courage and discipline. And what I'll tell you is I wasn't born with either one. So people talk about finding your discipline, right? Which you can, or your superpower. But frankly, I also believe you can create it. So the courage thing, I mean, nobody's born with courage. Mother Nature makes sure of that. So if you want to be courageous, it means you actually have to work on it. And I learned early, because of a number of things that happened to me growing up, about courage. And I found that the more courageous I act, the more the people actually wanted to follow me, right? Be with me, participate with me, like, So I actually just started taking more and more risks, raising my hand first, doing things and you build that muscle. And then discipline was another one, because I wasn't always very disciplined. So I use peer pressure. I tell people what I'm going to do. And that way I don't want to show up the next time I see them and say, oh no, I didn't really do that. So therefore, by telling people what I want to do, it gives me the discipline to say, okay, I better get this thing done. So you can find ways of building your superpowers.
Becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell enough people, then you've got to get it done.
Exactly right.
Now, you mentioned you have a lot of people reach out. Obviously, it's hard to interact with all of them. And so when you were writing this book, who did you have in mind? Who was the audience? Who was that group of people that reach out that you can't always connect with personally, that you want to make sure they got all this great content and insight?
Yeah, the people I really wanted to get to were professionals in their, frankly, their mid-20s to mid-30s. Those are the folks that are out there trying to build their careers, build their companies, right? Get things going. And it's in that same period of time that you have so much going on, not just professionally, but you tend to make the biggest decisions of your lifetime in that decade of 25 to 35, who you're going to marry, where you're going to live, what industry you're going to get into, right? Where are your networks, what school? I mean, all these things happen in this really condensed period. And most people don't think about any of that strategically. And so I wanted to share that, if you think about it strategically as you're going through it, you can actually improve your odds to be lucky and improve your odds to actually get what you want out of life, be that the job and the role, be that the company you're trying to build, whatever it happens to be.
Well, and one of the things that people in that age range deal with as they're getting married, starting a family, buying a house, is the concept of work-life balance. And you talk about in the book how you don't believe in that, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on maybe the misnomer that is work-life balance.
Yes, I really don't like that term. I mean, what is the balance, Jeff, right? It's a static thing, right? Even on both sides at all times. Whose life is like that? Life is like this, right? You're on this wave where you have highs and lows, you got personal, you got business, and if you're trying to actually keep stuff even, please, I think the term was created to make us all feel perpetually guilty. So no, I refuse to be judged by that. Instead, I think about life as work-life integration. I have my professional priorities. I have my personal priorities. I put them together and I prioritize ruthlessly. And you know what that means? Some things aren't going to get done, but I'm going to decide what gets done versus just letting things fall off the plate. So I try to integrate, I'll do walks and talks, meetings, one-on-ones. If it doesn't, no charts to be shown, et cetera, well, let's go walk while we have our conversation, right? I'll do hikes with friends on the weekend, go out to a play or a show, invite others to come with you. I mean, it's just trying to do multiple things at the same time of integrating my life. Because you know what? At the end of the day, I'm the same person.
Well, and I love your comment there about, some things aren't going to get done. I think one of the hardest things to do sometimes as a founder or an executive is saying no, right? People are constantly asking for your time. And at the end of the day, that's all we have. So any tips on how to politely say no when people ask for more than you've got to give?
Oh, listen, that is so hard. It's still hard for me because I want to be helpful. So what I've learned to do is instead of saying the hard, something comes in no, I try to point them somewhere else. So the answer is not me, but here, right? Or but who, or but, can I be helpful in a different way? And one of the questions I ask myself is, am I the best person to do what's being asked? Because yes, you could do it, but it doesn't always mean you're the best person. So using that lens also helps me prioritize what I actually do versus what I decline or try to suggest someone else, if you will, to do. The best way to think about this is your time is fixed, right? So let's talk about the plate. Now you have one plate and you can pile all kinds of things on that plate, but eventually stuff's going to start falling off. And the question is, do you just want to let stuff fall off the plate and break? Or do you want to consciously take it off so that nothing is getting broken, if you will, along the way? And keeping that mental image can also help you with being careful about saying yes, because bottom line is every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. You may not know what that something else is yet, but you are saying no to something else. Because to your point, Jeff, our time is finite.
Well, there's something really cool in your approach there of thinking of other people, because then all of a sudden you go from helping one person to potentially helping two. So there's a nice multiplier there where you kind of are benefiting more than just yourself and the person asking.
Exactly.
Well, and so much of what we're all about here at the center is mentorship, which is obviously one of the big asks that comes along. As Nicola mentioned, we've got this new ambitious program called Mentor Makers in partnership with Mentor Cloud, where we're trying to unlock 1 million hours of mentoring across 50,000 businesses in the next year. So we also mentioned the social campaign around tagging a mentor. So would love to hear, Shellye, just some thoughts from you around who have been some impactful mentors in your life and your journey, and how did that change the trajectory of your journey?
So a couple. I'm going to give you one real early in my career and one later in the career. So real early, because it affected how I think about mentors. I was at IBM at the time. I had probably 6 years or so experience, and IBM decided they wanted high potential people to have mentors. And they asked us to pick who we'd like to be our mentor. So I picked a gentleman. His name is Roland Harris. I knew him. He was a couple levels above me. I thought, okay, I think he likes me. He would be a good person. So I put his name down. Well, several days later, he calls me Shellye. I said, hey, Roland, Shellye, you put me down to be your mentor. Well, yeah, Roland, I thought you liked me. And he said, Shellye, you've got me. Go get somebody else. Huh. So that taught me two things. One, a mentor-mentee relationship doesn't have to be formal. And I have mentors that I didn't even know I had. Two, I can have as many as I want. So that both those things really framed and shaped my approach to mentors my entire career. So I have had a ton of mentors, and I've only asked a few people, and that was early on, to be my mentor, and then I learned that doesn't work. So I stopped asking. I just adopted mentors. So in the book, Unapologetically Ambitious, I literally tell people, here's how you adopt mentors. I've adopted mentors my whole life. And probably the one who had the most impact on me as an entrepreneur, for sure, was Bill Campbell. And he was a mentor I also adopted. I got a chance to meet him when I was working for LoudCloud with Mark and Ben. And he was on the board, and I ran sales and marketing, so I had to report to the board, and that's how I got a chance to know him. But he absolutely was not only a mentor, but over time became a sponsor. So yes, my big advice, get as many mentors as you can. And by the way, mentors, it's not just people to help you figure out your next job, your next career, right? The next step, but you can get mentors to help you do the job you already have. Because until you nail that, the next one doesn't come. And most people don't think about it that way. It's very rare that you have a job or a role that nobody else has ever done in any way, shape, or form. So why start from scratch? Talk to people. Start on first base instead of home plate.
Awesome. And once everybody's done reading Unapologetically Ambitious, make sure you go read the Bill Campbell story, $1 Trillion Coach. It's a great book.
It is.
Well, and Shellye, mentorship is really just one form of support, right? You talk about network of support, and how do you think about the other types of networks you need to build as a founder and as an entrepreneur?
I think building networks is really important, really important. And frankly, I've found that the best way to build a network is by giving. It's by helping. So by helping others and giving to others, you have a way to actually create a relationship, because a network is not how many contacts I have in my phone, right? It's not how many emails I know or phone numbers I have of people. To me, a real network comprises of people that you can literally call and will do or reach out to, and they will do something that for you, that's probably not convenient. To me, that's a real network. So building that means building a relationship. And I found the best way to build a relationship is to help people. Because if you help people, you get a chance to get to know you, you make a positive impression to begin with, they're more likely to be open to spending time with you or getting to know you because you've been helpful, right? So the example you gave before about something comes in, I can't do it, referring somebody else, you're right, that's a double win versus just saying no, you've been unhelpful. So you get no credit, right, or value at all. But by being helpful, that has been frankly, the biggest way. And I didn't even realize that that was the case until later on. I've always tried to be helpful to people, but it wasn't until later that I realized that, by doing this, it's one of the reasons I have the kind of network I have.
Yeah, it really comes down, there's that probably overused phrase of political capital, but every time you help somebody, that's another credit in your account with that person when you need some help. And oftentimes it comes back in ways you don't expect, right? It goes back to our earlier part of the discussion. If they know how to be helpful to you, all of a sudden it just kind of shows up one day and you've got some positive inbound opportunities.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Shellye, you talk a lot about in the book the need to plan and have strategic goals. And so as an entrepreneur, sometimes that can be, daunting. You're out there trying to figure out your product market fit or just, make payroll. But, how do you think about the need for kind of planning and setting really key goals?
I think it's important to keep in mind the prize. Now, you got to keep your eye on the prize. What is it you're actually trying to do? Because if you don't, I find it's almost impossible to actually make good decisions, because every decision is a trade-off. If there wasn't a trade-off, you wouldn't have to make a decision. Well, if you don't have a framework to use of what you're actually trying to optimize to, what you're trying to achieve, then you can make any decision. Doesn't matter. So keeping your eye focused on what is it you are trying to accomplish, what is it you are trying to do, allows you then to keep a framework in mind as you make decisions, which means you'll be able to make decisions faster. One of the biggest challenges I see with entrepreneurs is they spin on hard decisions. They spin. And one of the reasons why they spin is they don't actually have the clarity determined of where it is that they're trying to go, what that means, who's that target audience, what is the real problem you're trying to solve, who are you trying to, all of those things drive clarity, and clarity allows you to move and execute faster. And listen, being an entrepreneur is all about speed. It is all about speed. So that can just be so helpful. And to me, that's just the way I've lived my entire life.
Well, and that leads us right into one of the first questions to come in through the Q&A feature. As a reminder, you can enter your questions into the Q&A section. But one of the attendees asked, there are going to be failures and bad decisions, right? So even if you have goals and have a good framework and you make a call, it's not always going to work out. So how do you recover?
The key is if you just realize that, as soon as you realize that, oh, this is not going to work, or this is the problem, right? Stop it, cancel it, right? Kill it, whatever the right word is, depending on what's happening. Because let me tell you what happens. And I've been guilty of this, and we all have. You see something, it's going badly, but you're like, okay, well, maybe we can fix this, right? Maybe there's a way. You spend time trying to think of, okay, what can be done, et cetera, because you don't really want to kill something or end something that you just put all this investment in. It's all sunk cost. Every hour you spend beyond the point of realizing this isn't going to work, to try to fix, to try to repair, is an hour that you could be using to actually build your business proactively in a different way. So it's not just the cost of trying to save something that isn't going to make it. It's the opportunity cost that you've just lost because you haven't spent it moving things forward. And that's one of the hardest things. Trust me, I know. It's one of the hardest things. So as soon as you realize you made a mistake or made a challenge, it's fine. Just stop it, fix it, make a new decision, and move forward.
Yeah, it's just so hard sometimes as a founder. You get emotionally attached, right? And it's, that's the tough part, is to say, whoops, I made a mistake, and then to get moving.
Exactly.
Now, you've faced and overcome a lot of challenges as a groundbreaking African-American female executive in tech. So what considerations do you have for entrepreneurial leaders as we head into 2020 around diversity?
What I tell you is study after study after study after study, I could keep saying that, right, has shown that diversity helps with everything: innovation, long-term shareholder value, all these things. That's why these companies, whether it's the Nasdaq, whether it's Goldman Sachs, that come out and say, hey, listen, we only want to work with people, we only want to list people, companies, right, that have diversity. The best time to build diversity in your company is at the beginning. It's right now, because you have every single role to fill. Right? What happens is companies don't think about it because they're busy. And so it's easier to just pull people in that they know and they work with, that kind of stuff. They don't focus on it. And then they say, oh gosh, look around and say, we've got a problem. We need to fix this. But now I have 2 jobs available, right? So I have 2 skills that I need. Do it from the beginning. You got to fill out everything. You need the finance person. You need the lawyer. You need the salesperson. You need marketing. You need assistants. You need everything. So if you think about it from the beginning, it's a whole lot easier to build diversity into your organization. So make it part of the framework right up front.
We've got a lot of great questions coming in through the Q&A. So one of them goes back to something you mentioned before. You talked about how one of the key aspects of being an entrepreneur is speed. So how do you integrate speed and scalability to find product market fit?
So product market fit, let me talk. I see it's 2 different things. So product market fit is all about finding the problem that you can solve better than anybody else for a price point that delivers good returns, right? I mean, that's really finding the product market fit. That's what it is you're trying to do. So you want to do that as fast as you can before somebody else does that. So that's absolutely speed. with regards to scale, the key is timing the scale. You don't want to start to scale until you've proven that you can actually do what I just said. So you've got to make sure that you've got it right before you start to scale it. Because if you scale it and you've actually got it wrong, then fixing that, now that you've got the scale, I mean, the horse is now out of the barn, it will slow you down years because you have to go back and fix, repair, improve everything that you've already scaled out there, which is going to take all your resource away from focusing on the future. So scaling, be careful about speed. It's not just speed to scale. All right. You really want to be careful. People say it all the time. How fast can you get to this? How fast well, you can get there fast, but the problem is you can get yourself stuck. So I believe speed to find that value proposition, absolutely, because you got to get there faster than anybody else. But you want to work swiftly, but you want to work diligently to make sure what you've got is indeed scalable before you scale it.
Perfect. Now we have another attendee who says they're new in their industry and they don't have a lot of experience or a big network, but they know this is what they want to do for the rest of their life. So how do you let go of the insecurity of, that uncertainty and just really go for it?
So the question I ask myself whenever I'm facing a risk is, okay, what's the opportunity, right? Why is it I'm even thinking about taking this risk? What's the upside? And then I ask myself, look, if that sounds like it's worth it, then I ask myself, okay, what is the worst that can happen? And can I live with it? And when you ask yourself that, what it does is it helps you uncover what's creating the fear. Because many times we're afraid, but we don't actually spend time with ourselves to understand why. And therefore we never get through it. So what's the worst that can happen? And can I live with it? So what's the worst that can happen? You try it, it doesn't work. Okay, and you go back to your old industry. Well, you're right back where you started. Can you live with that? Probably. So take the risk, right? So that's how I would do it. What's the worst that can happen and can I live with it? And then I move forward.
We've got another very timely question here. We're talking about networking, mentoring, but none of us can get together. So what are some of your tips for networking when we're all physically apart?
Oh, I know it. Trust me, it's hard, but I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm still doing walks and talks, literally on the phone. So put the headphones on, right? Have a conversation. I walk, they walk. We just happen to be in two different places. I've done that remotely for sure. I do socially distanced activities. You can see I'm trying to always build in exercise to what I'm doing. That's important to me. So hikes, those kinds of things I absolutely do. Zooms. I mean, we're doing all kinds of Zooms, FaceTimes, everything else. And you know what? Even cards and letters, old fashioned, I will tell you, I think it's making a little bit of a comeback because so few people get anything by mail that when they do, it's actually pretty meaningful. So actually, even doing some old fashioned cards and letters at this time actually works.
Well, we've got another question in the chat here about when you're changing industries. So say you're going from tech into biotech, how can you do something like that strategically where you don't lose too many of your acquired skills or your value in that market?
Well, try to leverage the skills you've built. So if you're sitting there and let's say you're in tech security and you want to get into biotech, I don't know, but what's your strength? If your strength has been you've been doing engineering, then try to leverage what you're doing in engineering over. If you're a marketing person, same thing, then do marketing, right? Just in a different, because the discipline itself will enable you to get a kind of, if you will, leverage into that new area versus doing something completely different. The other is if you're trying to figure out how to transition into something like that and you've got time, there are a ton of organizations, nonprofit organizations. And I say nonprofit, they're not always just ones that are giving money to things. They're also associations, the whole bit. Well, get involved before you make the leap in an organization like that that's actually in the new field or focused in the field that you want to get into, so that you get some exposure, so that you're able to meet some people in that field. Then that will actually give you a path to be able to make a connection and hopefully make a transition.
We've got another question here about your journey to becoming a CEO. and how you talked about you needed to get to that seat, you had to take on a company that required a turnaround. And so really the question is, how did you get comfortable with that risk? And they use this term, how do you avoid the glass cliff around, women maybe only getting certain opportunities for leadership roles, where maybe there's a lot of downside. So how do you get comfortable taking that risk when we're trying to get to that ultimate seat, whether it's CEO or board member?
Yeah, I think about it the same way. Remember those questions I asked, right? What's the opportunity? What's the upside? What's the worst that can happen? And then once I figure out the worst that can happen, how do I mitigate the risk? So when I took the job as CEO, the company was a mess. So how am I going to mitigate the risk? Well, I knew I wanted a company at a top tier venture firm. Because my view there is even if the company failed, at least I created relationships at the top tier. And oh, by the way, the company was very broken. They knew that. So they knew the odds weren't even in my favor to have it make it. So if it didn't make it, it wasn't like I failed on something they expected to work, right? So it's a little nuanced, but that's one. And I wanted top tier venture firm. And I wanted to make sure that whatever technology the company had was technology that I could build off of. So I actually had someone come, because that's not my strength, their skill set, and due diligence for me on the technology platform before I took the job. So you do some things to mitigate risk to make sure you've got something that you can work with. And that's the way I do it. So what was the worst that could happen? The company failed, right? That was the worst that could happen. So what would that mean? Would that mean that I'd never be able to find a job again? No, I'd be able to find a job. It may not be the job that I want, right after that initially, but I could find a job. So it's not like I'm going to end up unemployed over time. So what's the real risk? That's why if you ask yourself what the real risk is and really think about it, you realize, you know what? You can take those risks.
We're starting to get some questions from some of the founders here about how do some more operational things. So when you're pitching, right, and you get some feedback from your clients or your users, you always have to make changes and pivot. And so how do you kind of stay confident in your pitch, even as you're making adjustments and changing the product or the service?
So a couple of things. One, almost all customers like to hear that you are customer focused as a company, right? As an organization, and definitely as the CEO. So as you get input and you're adapting, talk about it proactively to say, hey, here's what we're doing. We've just added this, or we've changed that based upon feedback from our customers. We've learned blah, 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 right? So actually incorporate it into the pitch. Don't think you have to actually hide those things, because it's absolutely a positive in the market if people see that you are indeed responsive to what the needs are, right? And requirements in the market.
And a similar, maybe related question. So a lot of people today, email is one of the primary marketing channels. And so how do you increase the success rate of getting, connections through your email campaigns to potential users when your startup doesn't have any brand or any money? How do you think about kind of getting those initial clients on?
So I'll tell you, yes, I know email is out there, but in this day and time, it is much harder, I think, than ever to actually find your customers, meaning get an email to the right person at the right time when they happen to be thinking about what it is that you are actually offering. I think it's better to reverse it, to try to figure out how do you make it as easy as possible for people who have the problem that you're trying to solve to find you. It's the same thing, it's just coming at it differently. But if you optimize for that, then you'll actually get I believe, much better returns, because because of the web and the internet, people spend a lot more time doing research before they ever even want to talk to a company. So typically when they finally talk to the company, they've already done a whole set of research. And if you're not easy to find and you're not out there within that research realm, they're not going to actually find you. And just because you send emails does not mean if they're going to connect with you. So spend your time figuring out how to make it easy for people to find me, whether it's the SEO searches. One of the things we did at MetricStream, for example, was when we were launching, same thing. Nobody knew us. We didn't have any money, right? The whole bit. And we launched something that we called complianceonline.com. Now, this is going to sound really basic today, but back then we're talking 2005. So it wasn't as common, but it was, all right, we need people to be able to find us. So we created a portal, complianceonline.com, where we literally just aggregated information about all aspects of risk and compliance and the whole bit. So when people did searches, they found our site. And then we looked like an advertiser, right? Brought to you by MetricStream, brought to you by, but it was Compliance Online was the brand. Well, that became a huge lead generation for us because we made it easy for people to find, right, us. And then we got a chance to see what they were looking for, what they were searching for, right, et cetera, which then helped us with our overall marketing messages. So put your dollars in figuring out how do you make it easy for companies to find you versus the other way around.
Well, and I love the concept of the buyer's journey. And there's a lot of research done on the fact that customers are going to do a lot of research before they ever want to interact with your sales reps. And so I think you're exactly right that if you can help arm them with the questions to ask that you have great answers for, that's an awesome way to do it. Shellye, you're on some amazing boards. And I know that's, was one of your big goals that you talked about in the book. One of the attendees is asking if you have any specific advice for first-time board members. What do you wish you would have known when you joined your first board, and how should people think about being successful in those roles?
Sure. So remember, they brought you on board for a reason. And what I mean by that is, boards try to bring people on board to fill different skills, experiences, backgrounds, et cetera. And so therefore, they do want to hear, what thoughts, advice, questions, et cetera, that you've got, especially in those areas. So if somebody brings me on the board, then I want to make sure that I'm contributing when we're talking about technology, globalization, right? Internet, right? Technology, all those things. But if we start talking about things like capital allocation, all right, that's not the time for me to be opining a lot. We've got other members on the board that are actually experts in that. Doesn't mean I don't ask questions. Sure, I can ask questions, but remember, your job is not to show how much you know. That is not the purpose of your role. Your role is to figure out how to help make the company as great a company as it can possibly be. So participate, but remember the lane, right, that you were brought in, and make sure you're at least contributing in those areas. The other is make sure you do your homework. Show up prepared. And that means not just reading the board deck that gets sent out in advance, but following the company, understanding what's going on in the industry, right? All of those things, because you can't help them with strategy if you don't understand the broader dynamic.
Well, and that first piece of advice you gave, that takes a lot of self-awareness, right? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people, once you're qualified to be on a board, they probably think they're qualified to opine on everything.
Exactly. And
so having that kind of mindset of why did they bring me on, I think that's really helpful. And, obviously doing the work is so key. We've got another question here asking if you've ever dealt with or witnessed blackballing, especially with people not appreciating ambition or advocacy for systemic change.
So would this be a thing about blackballing? So there's a situation where I thought I was ready to be promoted and get the next opportunity. And it just wasn't coming. And it wasn't coming. And lots of reasons, lots of excuses, and all those kind of things wasn't coming. So I finally had a skip level conversation. So with my boss's boss. And I shared that I'm ambitious and this is what I want to do and a whole bit. And he said, oh, yes, no, I know all that. But there just aren't jobs like you're looking for here. And here at the time I was living in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I said, well, I'm willing to move. And he said, oh, we didn't think you'd want to move. What? You're going to make that decision for me versus asking me? Right? And it's typical. I mean, I'm married, I have kids, my husband was working, and I'm sure they just thought, oh, no, that's crazy. So sometimes you get stuck and you may think you're blackballed, and it's much more, what should I say, bias, driven than it is anything else. You have to make sure that what you want and what you're willing to do is actually known. In terms of actually being blackballed, where nobody's going to hire me, talk to me, I actually haven't had that experience.
Well, and it kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation where if you're not proactively telling people how they can help you, they're not going to know. And so maybe kind of taking that same approach with a boss. Because we actually had a pre-submitted question. It was very similar. It said, how do you prevent people like your direct boss from being anxious about you having so much ambition, right? And so interestingly, first they have to know you have the ambition, and then say they react negatively to the fact that you are ambitious. How do you kind of deal with a boss like that?
Okay, so a couple things. Here's what I learned to do. I call it my palms up approach. So it's not that, okay, one day I'm going to be CEO, right? So all in your face. No, it's not that at all. Instead, take your boss's help. And you'll notice I use the word help. You'll hear help a lot in my strategies. You take their help. You say, one day, Jeff, I aspire to be, chief marketing officer. Do you think I have the potential for something like that in the future? And I will tell you, when you ask potential in the future, I've never had anybody say no, right? So they say yes, because it's no commitment, right? It's no this. No, why do you ask that? Because now you get to say, wonderful. What advice do you have for me on how I can develop the right skills or what experiences I need? Or did I just put it all out there, right? Okay, now you're asking this person for advice. So when you ask somebody for advice, you're automatically saying you're above me, right? You have more experience, you have more this, I'm asking you for advice. People love to give advice, is my experience. So they will give you advice. Now you take the advice and then you come back and you check in periodically on how you're doing. And guess what? This boss is now somebody who's working hand in hand with you on development. So you co-opt them. All right, so that's one. Another is I always focused when I got a new job on figuring out how to make my boss's job easier. How do I make my boss look good, right? How do I make that? So if you're focused that way, you're not a threat. You're actually the right-hand person.
Yeah, I can tell you, as you kind of sit there and manage a lot of people, you have your list in your head of, oh, I got to spend a lot of time on this person, or, oh, this person makes my life a lot easier. And that always, tilts the way you think about those folks, and frankly, you think about their future opportunities.
It does.
Well, we've got a pretty specific question around the compliance industry where you spent a lot of time. And I'll try to make the question a little bit more generic for the audience, but the specific question was, when you're pitching compliance products, how do you show clients that they can leverage the data as well? And so I guess, to make it a little bit broader, if you're pitching a point solution, how do you make sure customers appreciate the full value of your offering versus just kind of the point solution?
Sure. So first, you always have to make sure that when you're communicating, you are addressing the pain point that they've got, which is going to be that very specific thing, because they're not going to listen to anything else if you haven't convinced them of that. So here's the point solution. So compliance, right? So we are going to help you manage compliance so that when the FDA shows up, you can prove that you're doing what you're supposed to do, right? Very tactical, very specific. But in addition to that, by leveraging our software, you're also going to get insights on the trends, which areas of the business are actually have the most risk, right? Where is it working well? You're also going to, so what you do is you make sure you nail the problem, and then you show additional value that actually comes to them personally. Here's one of the problems that happens. People come in and they share the broader, and then the company can leverage this and the company can do that. And the company, well, that's all well and good. I have my own budget and I've got my own personal strategy, okay, and my own ambitions. So play to that. Make sure you understand who you're selling to, what they're trying to do personally. Most people are also ambitious. They want to do more than they're currently doing. So figure out how you can put it in those terms. So we'll solve this problem. The FDA shows up, you can prove it, etc. But more than that, you'll be able to now have data and insights on trends where there are problem areas, which means you can start to address, notice I'm talking that person directly, you can start to address issues and problems before they actually arise. It will actually also arm you to be able to figure out how dollars might be allocated for blah, 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 blah. So I'm giving the broader issue, but I'm showing how it actually affects that person. Because it's the person, even though a company decides, it's your champion, whoever the decision maker is, they decide. It's their budget. You got to make sure you're addressing their needs.
Fantastic. Well, as you're building your company, we did have a couple pre-submitted questions here on the all-important topic of fundraising, and a couple of them anchored on specifically some of the challenges around raising funding when you're a female entrepreneur. So I'm curious to hear about your experience raising capital and dealing with the investment community here in Silicon Valley and beyond.
Yeah, and I've raised a lot of capital, well over $100 million worth of capital. So yes, and trust me, it's not easy. So especially for females, let me talk about this for a minute. This is also true for people of color, and that is, it's not so much that you walk in to raise money and people say, "Oh, you're a woman, I'm not investing," or "Oh, you're Black, I'm not investing." It's not that. But what happens is we don't match the profile, right? And we're creatures of pattern matching. Mother Nature kind of did that to us. So what happens is you don't match that pattern, you don't match the profile. So the mind says, "Oh, you're riskier." And because you're riskier, I'm going to delve into the risks. So what studies have shown is when you go and talk to the venture capitalists, et cetera, they'll spend far more time with you talking about what could go wrong. What are the issues? Why might this not work, right? All the negative things. And then when they finish the meeting, they walk out thinking, this just doesn't feel right. Well, of course not. Whereas for people who look like them, most of the questions are on the upside. What potential? What could it be? Right? Where's the opportunity? What is the size of the market? So you walk out feeling positive. So a lot of it is just that. So what that means is if you're a woman or a person of color and you're raising money, when you get the questions on, well, what could go wrong here? Make sure you reframe it. So you give them the answer. What could go wrong here? Well, whatever. Customers could adopt more slowly than we believe. So answer the question, but don't dwell on it. Then go to, but the opportunity, right? So what you want to do is to change from the negative trajectory of the tone, answer it, and then get right back up on the positive. Answer it, get right back up on the positive. So when they come out, that feeling, right, is more balanced versus kind of where it was. So that's definitely one. Make sure you know the facts, make sure you're concise in your answers, right? And you know your numbers.
Well, and one other question here that came in the pre-submitted list that I love, the participant said, I really want to open my own business. Would you recommend that I pursue a master's degree first or find a company or establish entrepreneurs to apprentice under? So that kind of, can you learn this through books or is it something you got to learn through real life experience?
Oh boy. So it all depends on how you learn and what's required. And what I mean by that is some people learn hands-on, right? They're the people that don't bother reading directions. They pull out the things and just try to figure stuff out, right? There's others that say, no, let me study the directions, understand every single step, and then I'm going to go do. So it depends on how you learn. If you're the person who reads all the directions, gets all the, you probably want a master's, because what it is you want the confidence. Typically what that does, it gives you confidence that when you approach it, you know what you're doing. So to get that confidence and that support, if that's necessary, fine. If that's not the kind of learner you are, then go work with an entrepreneur and learn on the job. So there isn't one answer here. It depends upon how you learn and in what environment you thrive.
Well, back to that all important topic of self-awareness, which I think is really key to people's success. Well, one thing that really showed through, Shellye, in the book was, you're all about the power of planning. And so as we wrap up here, I'd love to hear what's your plan for the new year with everything that 2020 taught us and everything hopefully that there is to find in the future in 2021.
Well, I'll tell you, this phase for me is all about impact and inspiration. I am really trying to figure out ways to help more people achieve their aspirations. Because honestly, especially for women and people of color, we're lucky if we get a chance to basically exercise or utilize, half of our capabilities. So I want more people to be able to do that. And that's why I wrote the book. That's why I'm spending time speaking and trying to get the word out, putting a lot out there in terms of articles and what have you. So right now I'm just trying to communicate. And at the same time, I spent the last 50 years telling the universe what it is that I want. Now I'm listening to the universe and trying to figure out what it wants for me, where I can actually provide more impact and inspiration and help others achieve their aspirations and their goals in life.
Well, based on the fact that you've always accomplished your other plans in the past, I have no doubt you'll be successful in the future endeavor to figure out what the universe wants from you and how you can best help people find their true ambition and be unapologetic about it.
Well,
Thanks
thank
so
you
much for the
very
time today,
much.
Shellye.
Thank you.
Shellye, we are so incredibly grateful of your impact and ambition in the world. It has been a true honor and a pleasure to have you here. Jeff, thank you so much for guiding this conversation. To all of our attendees joining, we are so grateful for your time, realizing that it is the only finite resource that all of us have is the time in the day. So we are excited to have had you with us on this conversation. We now have an ask for you. Please make sure in that chat window that you saw a feedback link to let us know how today's session landed and what more resources and support you need in this time. Again, we build programs based on our entrepreneurs' needs. So the more that you tell us, the more that we're able to do just that. And again, mentorship matters in this moment and always, as we've heard from Shellye and Jeff throughout today's chat. So please make sure to tag and recognize those mentors that have made a difference in your life through our social campaign. And most importantly, sign up to receive that mentorship yourself if needed, or perhaps contribute if you're at that point and ability in your life. We have some amazing programs coming up based on your asks from last month. So please stay tuned for those. On December 9th, we're going to be covering self-reliant entrepreneurs, the 7 pillars to feed your soul and grow your business, a great well-being and aspiration course that all of us probably need in this time at this year. And then on December 11th, Venture Finance with Wilson Sonsini and special guests from Foundry Group and Creative Ventures, where we'll be looking at some of the trends and analysis that have been coming through on what venture reporting is showing in this last quarter and what may be ahead for us in the first quarter of 2021. Again, thank you so much for all of your time, your support. Our thanks to our sponsors, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you very soon. Take care.